Hi, boys and girls. Mr. Morse again, and today we're talking about Roman economy, or how the Romans actually paid for everything and then got everything. Because not everything grew in Rome, and they had to go out and get things to bring in. And then, of course, they had something they had to go out to trade with. So today we're talking Roman economy. And just like before, you guys have three vocab words: trade, economy, and merchant. So, probably the most important job in Rome, and really any other civilization, even here in America, has to be the farmer, the people who work to grow the food. They have the most important job because they're the ones growing the wheat, the barley, the olives, the grapes, the apples, the onions, the celery, everything. And they're the ones that paid the taxes that went into Rome, too. So they had to treat the farmers well, even though most likely they did not because they were the poorer ones. And usually the plebeians were the ones who were the farmers. Remember, the patricians are the ones that own all the land, and the plebeians were the ones doing all the work. So the plebeians were the farmers working the patricians' land, and more likely, probably paying the patricians to use their land and keeping some of the food for themselves. Farming was the backbone of the Roman economy. Very, very important, as you can see a couple of pictures here of early Romans farming. There are other jobs than just that. There were the craftsmen, the people that made the pots, the pans, the jewelry, the weapons that the army used, people that built furniture, people that built houses, people that build everything. Just like today, we have craftsmen today that build fine things that people need in their homes and use every day. The Romans had the exact same jobs. Engineers. You could go to school if you were wealthy enough, and you could learn to be an engineer and design and build things like bridges, like buildings, like houses. Government, of course, was a job. If you were early on in the Roman Republic and you were a patrician, a wealthy landowner, then you could own land and, of course, obviously have an opportunity to join the Senate. Once the Roman Empire and Julius Caesar came into power for the next 500 years, you still could be part of the Senate, but even at that point, as we talked previously, even plebeians had the opportunity to join the government and Senate positions at that point. Roman entertainment. Just like today, people in ancient Rome, they didn't have TV and they didn't have radio or movies, but what they did have were plays. They had large theaters. People would go and pack in to watch um, people act. And a lot of the times there would be a person standing in front of the stage telling everybody what was happening as the actors behind him wore masks to either be a male or a female character. And then they would go and do whatever it is they were doing as the actor that the play called for. And the person standing in front of the play would explain to everybody what's happening. In this scene, this character is upset. Oh no, she's upset and she's running away. This person's laughing because of the joke that was just told. And that's the way these people would watch their plays. Other parts of entertainment would be musicians that would play at parties. You would have dancers that would probably be in and out dancing on the stage in between the actors. Chariot races, as we talked about before with economy, or excuse me, talked about before with culture, and of course gladiators. But all of these things were entertainers and jobs people had. The Roman soldier. Where do I begin? What a fantastic topic. The Roman soldier was usually a plebeian at the age of 18 who probably got tired of farming, who probably got tired of not having a lot, would join the army and become a soldier and have the opportunity to travel all over the Republic and then later the Empire and see far off lands that that person would not have a chance to see if they stayed back in their land as a farmer. They did get paid, not a lot. They got to travel. They got to be part of an army, part of a team. They got to be with a group of people, and of course, usually very well trained, very well fed, very well exercised, and the greatest army the ancient world had ever seen. The Roman soldier was a pretty good gig. And if you were in the army long enough and your pay got raised per how many years you were in, you could never get to the point where you would be a general or a commander because those roles were for patrician men. So sometimes you have these very well trained plebeian soldiers that have been training and fighting for many years. And then you'd have a patrician man who owned a lot of land who decided he wanted to join the army, and they would make him a general. You have all these very well trained soldiers underneath this inexperienced general, but luckily enough, uh, they never did lose a lot of battles, coincidentally enough. But what a great topic, Roman soldier. In ancient Rome, as I mentioned before, they had to trade. The citizens of ancient Rome did not want to buy locally made sourced products all the time. They wanted more exotic goods, and thanks to traders, they could. The traders sailed across the Mediterranean because, of course, the peninsula was in the very middle of the Mediterranean, to nearby countries like Egypt, Phoenicia, Austria, England, North Africa, Spain, and brought back papyrus, glass, salt, tin, cooking pots, olive oil, and various many things that people could afford and expensive things that, of course, the very wealthy could afford. They brought back cotton, pepper, cinnamon. Spices were so important to their cooking back then, especially Chinese spices and Chinese silk. And of course, they would take things to trade back. Take things to trade back. And that's what the merchants would do. A Roman merchant would be the person that would be trading things. They would be out selling and buying things on that trade. So a Roman merchant might take a large bunch of, let's say, Roman grains and travel to a point where they would trade to get silks and then bring those silks back after they've traded, of course, their grains, bring the silks back to Rome and sell at a higher price. Thus, of course, the profit they would get for selling the silk at a higher rate would be their profit, how they lived. So they would take money, buy grains, Roman grains, travel out far enough to meet up with another merchant who was peddling something else, buy that, bring it back to Rome as an exotic good, and sell it at a higher price, thus keeping the profit for themselves. And this made the Roman Empire very wealthy. It made certain people very wealthy. And what a great idea for people who don't own land. If you're a plebeian, maybe being a merchant might be a good job, but it's also dangerous because you're traveling pretty much by yourself to places that people don't normally go trade. Let's watch this film on Roman coinage.
Ancient Rome Economy and Trade by Tim Smith Jr.
Evan Ogburn.
and Sam Willard. Trade. Roman trade was essential because they didn't grow a lot of their own food. Bread was an important part of their diet, so they traded with Egypt for a lot of grain. They also imported spices from the southeastern part of their empire. As well as that, they traded with Britain for silver, China for silk, and imported wild animals from Africa for gladiator fights. Roman taxes. The tax rate in Rome started out as 1%, then rose as high as 3%. The modest taxes were charged against the lands, real estate, and slaves, and animals. Taxes were also collected from individual things. Farmers could donate an amount of their grain instead of paying taxes. This meant that farmers didn't want to grow a large quantity of grain and they would have to put most of it as taxes.
Coins. The Roman people would use a bronze lump as a trade. Right? They would trade it and melt it down and use it as weapons and other materials. The Roman government had a coin system called minting, which the Republic used. Roman Republic coins were traded under the dominion of Senate.
Which means the Roman Senate was in charge of putting the coins
Romans
out
had
there.
a slave-based economy. The main economic concern was feeding vast number of Romans all across the Mediterranean.
Don't you love it when students make a film and they can barely read the things they've written?
Some staple crops of Italian Roman farmers include various grains,
And you're right, Italian and Roman should be capitalized, students making this video.
olives, and grapes. Olive oil and wine were important exports of the city river.
So these are all of the links from where we got of all of the.
So thank you. The reason why I played that video was it had some very good information in it. The Roman coinage was used by the Senate and put out by the Senate, maintained by the Senate, to make sure that the coins were out being used. Because after a while, think about it, people are going to get tired of having to trade things all the time And you're going to want, okay, with Roman coins, trade goods with lifeblood, Roman coins were important because if you have a set value, if this piece of silver is worth 5 bags of grain, then you don't need to carry 5 bags of grain, trade for something. You could bring this piece of silver. And when you hand that piece of silver over for whatever it is you're getting, they are now giving you the value of those 5 bags of grain. That's kind of how money still works. For every dollar you have, there's a set amount of gold at the national minting, national agencies, where there is that gold that every time you turn over a dollar, it's a dollar's worth of gold that is in play. $5, $10, $100. Okay, and that's in the Federal Reserves. So you don't actually get the gold, but you're trading a note worth that much for whatever it is you're buying. Back then, same thing. Their gold and their silver coins were based on the trade value of the things they had. As the video had said too, slavery was the key economy. Slavery kept the economy of Rome moving because slaves were the property of the owner and worked for free. You had to feed them and house them, but unfortunately, a lot of times they didn't feed them very much and they didn't house them very well. But if you took care of your slaves, then your slaves could actually do you a very good favor. Slavery is terrible, ladies and gentlemen. But down here, as it says, the smart slaves who read and write would run their master's businesses for them. And in return, their master would build them a nice house and let their families live with them and feed them the best food and dress them very well. And a lot of time, slaves that work for patrician families in this type of facet that ran businesses lived a better life than free plebeian Romans did. You might have a slave running a property and actually be in charge of plebeian farmers because the slave in charge works for the patrician that owns the land and can count and read and keep people in line. And he's a slave. Interesting, huh? So, where did they trade? Take a look right here, and this is the boot of Italy. This is the peninsula. But it didn't just stop there. Of course, everything here in orange is the Roman Empire. But look at these trade routes. They would go over here to the Persian Empire. They go into the Kushan Empire. They would then even go into the Empire of China. And we're talking about silk earlier. This is where the Silk Road was. The silk would come through here, and all of a sudden it would make its way into the Mediterranean, and then the Romans would have the opportunity. Now, a Roman merchant would not have to travel all the way over here. What he would do is that Roman merchant might meet at a hub here, or maybe meet at a hub here. And maybe a Chinese man would trade his silks here, and then that next man would take the silks to here, this hub, and meet a Roman man and trade the silks, and then the Roman man would bring it back to Rome. And that's the way merchants and trade hubs worked. Well, now that we're done talking about Roman economy, and economy, of course, being the process of keeping everybody's goods and services working, you guys are now going to have an opportunity to do some reading about this. I hope you guys learned something. Always a pleasure talking to you. See you later.